Novus, a Just Bees book club. Um, Over the last month or so, I've been reading A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. You may have heard of him. Hold on, there was like a bunch of um, glare on there. There's the cover. Uh, yeah, there we go. Um, I read Dubliners in, I believe, my senior year of high school, and I remember quite loving The Dead specifically. It was sort of a transformative moment for me of being like, I know I like books quite a bit, but I didn't know words could fuck me up just by being placed in a specific order in that specific way. It was like a really special sort of transformative experience for me. Went on to do a literature major. Now, spent most of my adult life making money by writing words, not in an exciting way, in a very, was a technical writer, was one of those people who occasionally writes an essay as an example paper for an example term paper for students. Wrote a lot of SEO bullshit, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't say that Dubliners was like the thing that taught me that words can be impactful and aesthetically pleasing, but it was definitely like a stepping stone along the way. And I just haven't touched Joyce since. Um, until I saw, yeah, this particular cover of A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. It's like a mass market, published by Signet Books, and God, complete and unabridged. And I wonder if there's a, yeah, first printing 48, second printing 49. Um, so yeah, late 40s publication of this book. And it was just like this seems much more approachable to me than a lot of you know the massive fucking annotated Ulysses and shit like that. And I've been on this like weird Ken to reread Proust, and I'm not quite there. My brain is not there. Um, and I was just like, let's give this a shot. Maybe it'll be a fucking bust. And at certain points it felt like one, where I was just not fucking processing things, but I really fucking like this book. It ended up just having enough moments that like grabbed me and sucked me in at points where I was like kind of flailing, um, and also just like you know the joy of language. It's not Finnegan's Wake. It's not Ulysses, right? It doesn't. I mean, it starts. Uh, Once upon a time, and a very good time it was, there was a moo cow coming down along the road, and this moo cow that was down along the road met a nice little boy named Baby Tuku. His father told him that story. His father looked at him through a glass. He had a hairy face. He was Baby Tuku. The moo cow came down the road where Betty Byrne lived. She sold lemon plat. Oh, the wild rose blossoms. Oh, on the green little palace, or on the green little place. He sang that song. That was his song. Oh, the green wath botheth. Uh, Botheth, maybe. When you wet the bed, first it is warm, then it gets cold. His mother put on the oil sheet that had that queer smell. Um, so it opens with a sort of play of language, but it's a play of language that's pretty clearly anchored in the first person experience of a baby. Um, it also opens before that with et, et ignotas animum dimitit in artes. I do not speak Latin. I have never learned Latin, but that's from the Metamorphoses, book 8, page 18, Ovid. Um, yeah, there was no point in this book where I was like, I hate this. There were a lot of points in this book where I was like, I don't understand what's fucking happening. I'm not sure what I'm reading. But I wanted to sort of organize this by going through basically like the three big sequences uh, that really dragged me back in even when I was flagging the most, and to sort of like talk about it. The the rough idea is this is a book about Stephen Daedalus, named after Daedalus, the father of Icarus. slayer of the Minotaur, creator of the wax wings. Not in fiction, but in reality, in a way that's pretty explicitly brought up. Uh, and it's sort of just his moments throughout his life when he was like a kid through when he was in college, basically. Where is that? Oh, okay, there we go. Um, and it's sort of told in vignettes, and it takes him through like his early days in boarding school, and frankly, a lot of that stuff was like I I was having a lot of trouble with that. Like in a Catholic boarding school in Ireland, in the teens, maybe I want to say, like no, way earlier than that, because this is written in 1914, I believe. I've already torn out that page, so I can't re-reference it. But yeah, there's like long bits in that in the early parts where I was just like, I think they're describing like a rugby match or something like that, but I don't really understand. And there's like long discussions of the specificities of Catholic boarding school and in the late 1800s, presumably. Um, uh, and that stuff was that's the beginning of the book, and it was not grabbing me. And then there was this moment where Stephen catches a cold, presumably because he's been bullied by being pushed into like a ditch where he got all wet and caught a cold, and he has this whole feverish sequence where he imagines getting buried in the cemetery behind the school, and then he has this whole sort of vivid dream sequence about Christmas, and then he does have the Christmas moment, and this is the moment I want to talk about first. He goes back home to his family to celebrate the Christmas holiday, and his uncle Charles and this woman named Dante start sort of having a bit of a fight, and where's a good place to start here? Let's say, okay, here. Dante broke in angrily. If we are a priest-ridden race, we ought to be proud of it. They are the apple of God's eye. Touch them not, says Christ, for they are the apple of my eye. And can we not love our country then? Asked Mr. Casey. Are we not allowed to follow are we not to follow the man that was born to lead us? A traitor to his country, replied Dante. A traitor and adulterer. The priests were right to abandon him. The priests were always the true friends of Ireland. Were they, Faith? Said Mr. Casey. He threw his fist on the table and, frowning angrily, protruded one finger after another. Didn't the bishops of Ireland betray us in the time of the Union when the Bishop Lanigan presented an address of loyalty to Marcus Cornwallis? Didn't the bishops and priests sell the aspirations of their country in 1829 in return for Catholic emancipation? Didn't they denounce the Fenian movement from the pulpit and in the confession box? And didn't they dishonor the ashes of Terence Bellew McManus? His face was glowing with anger, and Stephen felt the glow rise to his own cheek as the spoken words thrilled Mr. Dedalus. As the spoken words thrilled him, Mr. Dedalus uttered a guffaw of coarse scorn. Oh, by God, he cried. I forgot little old Paul Cullen, another apple of God's eye. Dante bent across the table and cried to Mr. Casey, Right! They were always right! God and morality and religion come first. Mrs. Dedalus, seeing her excitement, said to her, Miss Riordan, don't excite yourself, answering them. God and religion before everything, Dante cried. God and religion before the world. Mr. Casey raised his clenched fist and brought it down on the table with a crash. Very well, then, he shouted hoarsely. If it comes to that, no God for Ireland. John! Cried Mr. Dedalus, seizing his guest by the coat sleeve. Dante stared across the table, her cheeks shaking. Mr. Casey struggled up from his chair and bent across the table towards her, scraping the air from before his eyes with one hand as though he were tearing aside a cobweb. No God for Ireland, he cried. We have had too much God in Ireland. Away with God! Blasphemer! Devil! screamed Dante, starting to her feet and almost spitting in his face. Uncle Charles and Mr. Daedalus pulled Mr. Casey back into his chair, talking to him from both sides reasonably. He stared before him out of his dark, flaming eyes, repeating, "Away with God, I say." Um, yeah, fuck, some things up there, but I, what a good scene. Just like impeccable writing, just forwarding the themes, and also just like just a killer scene. Um, uh, in terms of themes, this is like the big thing here, right? Is this is sort of the central conflict of this book. Stephen is, well, it's not the it's a central conflict maybe pushed aside is maybe a better way to say it. Stephen is growing up, is coming into his own as an artist by the end of the book, but through Catholic boarding school, Catholic college, the culture of Catholicism in Ireland, especially at the time, when there was the troubles and everything were like brewing. Um, there is a very clear and very subtle, I guess, is not quite the word, sort of below the surface, boiling tension sort of thing, between the religious aspects of Ireland and the political aspirations of Irish nationalism, that intersects within Irish communism sometimes, especially later in the book. But this is an incredible moment where the things that Stephen doesn't know that he is confronting in his life are brought up before him and externalized in his family, um, in a very relatable way, right? Like, who has not been? I've never been. Who has not been made aware of the uh, prototypical holiday dinner table where the family's underlying differences come to a boil. Um, it's an archetypical scene in many ways, and just and it's just written so fucking well. I'm a little bit mad that I couldn't do it more justice, but I bet you could find somebody on YouTube reading it very well. Probably in an audiobook also. Yeah, from that point on, Stephen ends up not going back to Clongowes, I don't really know how to pronounce that, and spending some time with his father, who's kind of a fuck up, as Joyce's father seems to have been. And they, you know, they hang out. Stephen, like, sort of learns to enjoy worldly passions. um, he doesn't. I'm not quite talking about the carousing yet that happens, but uh, he learns to find joy in like going with his father to different merchants and getting some candy or whatever, stuff like that. There's there's not a lot of aesthetics theory stuff in here that I remember, at least at this point. But the oh yeah, like this page. He like has to take a walk because he's so upset. Um, uh, let's see. A film still veiled his eyes, but they burned no longer. A power akin to that which had often made anger or resentment fall from him brought his steps to rest. He stood still and gazed up at the somber porch of the morgue, and from that to the dark cobbled laneway at its side. He saw the word "lots" on the wall of the lane, and breathed slowly the rank, heavy air. That that is horse piss and rotted straw, he thought. It is a good odor to breathe. It will calm my heart. My heart is quite calm now. I will go back. So yeah, he's like this bit. He's like struggling a lot with this seeming dichotomy within himself, where he's like, I don't have these like grand passions that I have heard described. Everything just sort of rolls off my back. But also he has these like really rough moments where he like has to go and smell something or whatever that he hates to calm down. It's also a mortification of the flesh in Catholic terms, of ways that he can uh, assault his own instincts or sensibilities or senses even to become a better Catholic. Which brings us to the second bit passage that I kind of wanted to read out. Um, yeah, this is yes. Okay, so this is when Stephen is being walked around by his father in the college that he's going to go to. So he's years older at this point, and he's having just a really miserable time. He's like completely unimpressed by his father's weird sentimental musings and conversations with the porter or whatever that's showing them around about all the people who have passed and just just like not really fucking feeling this weird college tour um, until this particular moment. Um, oop. During these halts, Stephen stood awkwardly behind the two men, wary of the subject and waiting restlessly for the slow march to begin again. By the time they had crossed the quadrangle, his restlessness had risen to fever. He wondered how his father, whom he knew for a shrewd, suspicious man, could be duped by the servile manners of the porter, and the lively southern speech which had entertained him all the morning now irritated his ears. They passed into the anatomy theater where Mr. Daedalus, the porter aiding him, searched the desks for his initials. Stephen remained in the background, depressed more than ever by the darkness and silence of the theater and by the air it wore of jaded and formal study. On the desk, he read the word fetus cut several times in the dark-stained wood. The sudden legend startled his blood. He seemed to feel the absent students of the college about him and to shrink from their company. A vision of their life which his father's words had been powerless to evoke sprang up before him out of the word cut in the desk. A broad-shouldered student with a mustache was cutting in the letters with a jackknife, seriously. Other students stood or sat near him, laughing at his handiwork. One jogged his elbow. The big student turned on him, frowning. He was dressed in loose gray clothes and had tan boots. Stephen's name was called. He hurried down the steps of the theater so as to be as far away from the vision as he could be, and, peering closely at his father's initials, hid his flushed face. But the word and the vision capered before his eyes as he walked back across the quadrangle and towards the college gate. It shocked him to find in the outer world a trace of what he had deemed until then a brutish and individual malady of his own mind. His monstrous reverie came thronging into his memory. They too had sprung up before him suddenly and furiously out of mere words. He had soon given in to them and allowed them to sweep across his and abase his intellect, wondering always where they came from what den of monstrous images, and always weak and humble towards others, restless and sickened of himself when they had swept over him. "Hey, bedad, there's the groceries, sure enough," cried Mr. Daedalus. "You often heard me speak of the groceries, didn't you, Stephen? Many's the time we went down there when our names had been marked, and a crowd of us, Harry Purd, and little Jack Mountain, and Bob Dias, and Maurice Moriarty, the Frenchman, and Tom O'Grady and Mick Lacey that I told you of this morning, and Joey Corbett, and poor little good-hearted Johnny Keeves of the Tantals." Yeah. Not quite the same explosive scene as the Christmas party, but that particular moment just really struck me as kind of a beautiful piece of writing. The and relatable, I guess, in some ways. The ways that a particular detail can stand out in such a powerful way that it can convey to you something that somebody has been trying to convey to you. It can convey to you a thing that somebody else has been trying to convey to you, in a way that they weren't getting through. Right? Seeing the word fetus conjures a whole world in Stephen's mind, in the way that his father walking around being like, "Oh, and then me and Mick Lacey did this thing, and me and etc. And you know, I talk to you about the grocery store all the time, or talk to you about this or that. Is just like an alienating thing, and then but seeing an image of something can draw out this whole world in a way that other things can't. I just thought it was like a particularly little good piece of writing, and it gets at sort of I think what this book becomes about from this point on. This is page 65 of one like 200. Um, so we're only like not super deep into the book, but I think this is the point at which a portrait of the artist as a young man starts to make sense as a title, where we start getting specifically what I'm going to be talking about in the next passage as into the aesthetic theory of the whole thing, and maybe actually just to remind myself because I have a couple. It's just this last one. Oh no, I got two more. Yeah. Okay. Um, I don't know. The next thing is about Bible stuff actually. But yeah, it's I think point being that last passage I read I think is a really good example of what when this book starts to feel like you have a hold on Stephen as a character and starts to advance its own aesthetic theory, which is sort of the last thing I want to talk about. Um, at this point, like, or around this point, Stephen starts to lose his faith, I guess, go through a dark night of the soul. He has gone to like a Jesuit school for a long time and is basically offered the ability to, or no, this is before that. He goes through the dark night of the soul earlier, where he has fallen in love with this girl Eileen, but like nothing happens, and so he like gives into the sins of the carnal flesh or whatever, and goes and visits sex workers. I believe is what it's alludes to. I don't think it didn't strike me as gross, but you know, um, I'm missing context sometimes. Um, and then he has like a come to Jesus moment and like really gets deep into this Jesuit school that he's going to the point where he's like offered an ability to. I'm like jumping up back and forth throughout this whole book. That's fine. He's like offered the priesthood basically. He's offered the priesthood and has this really powerful reaction and ends up rejecting it in order to go to college to pursue life as a writer. And I can probably do a couple at a time here. I think I'm covering most of what I wanted to cover, which is nice. Can I do? Yeah, that worked. The next thing I want to read is just another sort of like the first one is closer to a just a piece of brilliant fucking writing. This is he goes on a retreat at his Jesuit school. It's 100 pages in, and Joyce just here writes what might genuinely be the most incredible fire and brimstone like Catholic preacher sermon or a series of sermons that I've maybe ever read. I don't come from that tradition. I guess my father's side of my biological father's side of the family was Catholic or is Catholic. I don't really know. But never I was never immersed in that in any way. But I've experienced a number of films and novels and various other media records that do preachers, and I just don't think I've ever read anything quite like this. Yes, a just God. Men, reasoning always as men, are astonished that God could mete out an everlasting and infinite punishment in the fires of hell for a single grievous sin. They reason thus because, blinded by the gross illusion of the flesh and the darkness of human understanding, they are unable to comprehend the hideous malice of mortal sin. They reason thus because they are unable to comprehend that even venial sin is of such a foul and hideous nature that even if the omnipotent Creator could end all the evils and misery in the world, the wars, the diseases, the robberies, the crimes, the deaths, the murders, on condition that he allowed a single venial sin to pass unpunished, a single venial sin, a lie, an angry look, a moment of wilful sloth, he, the great omnipotent God, could not do so because sin, be it in thought or deed, is a transgression of his law, and God would not be God if he did not punish the transgressor. A sin, an instant of rebellious pride of the intellect, made Lucifer and a third part of the cohorts of angels fall from their glory. A sin, an instant of folly and weakness, drove Adam and Eve out of Eden and brought death and suffering into the world. To retrieve the consequences of that sin, the only begotten Son of God came down to earth, lived and suffered and died a most painful death, hanging for 3 hours on the cross. Oh, my dear little brethren in Christ Jesus, will we then offend that good Redeemer and provoke his anger? Will we trample again upon that torn and mangled corpse? Will we spit upon that face so full of sorrow and love? Will we, too, like the cruel Jews and the brutal soldiers, mock that gentle and compassionate Savior who trod alone for our sake in the awful winepress of sorrow? Every word of sin is a wound in his tender side. Every sinful act is a thorn piercing his head. Every impure thought deliberately yielded to is a keen lance transfixing that sacred and loving heart. No, no, it is impossible for any human being to do that which offends so deeply the divine majesty, that which is punished by an eternity of agony, that which crucifies again the Son of God and makes a mockery of him. I pray to God that my poor words may have availed today to confirm in holiness those who are in a state of grace, to strengthen the wavering, to lead back to the state of grace the poor soul that has strayed, if any such be among you. I pray to God, and do you pray with me, that we may repent of our sins. I will ask you now, all of you, to repeat after me the act of contrition, kneeling here in this humble chapel in the presence of God. He is there in the tabernacle, burning with love for mankind, ready to comfort the afflicted. Be not afraid. No matter how many or how foul the sins, if only you repent of them, they will be forgiven you. Let no worldly shame hold you back. God is still the merciful Lord, who wishes not the eternal death of the sinner, but rather that he be converted and live. There's a lot more pages of that, but I just and I don't even know if that's like the best particular passage of it, but it's just that whole retreat that they go on is, oh my God, it's just impeccably written, especially the priest's sermons. So now it's time to talk aesthetic theory, I think. Also, that is the moment in which he has his change of heart. This is all the stuff I was describing about him being offered a priesthood and stuff. It actually happens after this. That's fine. Let's see. So the last bit of the book is Stephen in college, having rejected the priesthood, and sort of developing his own aesthetic theory. He's a very astute student in many ways. He's he's struggling very specifically with questions raised by Aquinas and Aristotle in the Poetics, and he's producing his own theories to fill in the gaps of I think there's a moment where he says like Aristotle has no theory of dread or something like that. I don't remember exactly the line, but it's I love it. I found his arguments like deeply annoying in a very real way. In the way that somebody who's deep in their own thing can be very annoying because they're just talking about their own shit. And they're wrong. Like they are not. Stephen is not doing criticism from the position of wanting to be a critic. He's doing criticism from the position of wanting to be an artist. So he's clarifying things for himself that can push his own project forward. That when I was reading them, I was just like, yeah, that's that's poorly argued, my friend, and that's important. That's an important part, I think, of becoming a certain type of artist. The type of artist that Joyce would become and become very well regarded for. Um, this has gone on for quite a while. If you didn't know, I quite enjoyed reading this. It was rough at times, but I'm glad I read The Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, and I'm glad I was able to sort of think through it. I think I was talking to a coworker a few days ago, and I think I said this, and I don't know where this came from. I'm sure I pulled it from somewhere, but I referred to it as an iceberg novel, where I was like, I think I got about 20% of it, and I'm okay with the fact that the other 80% is just underwater to me. Maybe at some point in the future I'll come back to it. I'll and read it in a context that would allow me to be illuminated on certain things. But for now, I feel comfortable with having a sort of a sense of the top 20%. Before I get to the last bit, I guess the part I'm at here now, I'm there. There's an explicit discussion of aesthetic theory that Stephen Daedalus offers to his friend Lynch, that is like a really good scene because there's like a this pretty explicitly communist agitator going through the college, and they like get into like a little tete-a-tete, and Stephen like pulls Lynch aside, and they end up leaving, and Lynch is like from a poorer background, and is just like listening to Stephen talk, and is explicitly just like, if you're gonna tell me about your fucking aesthetic theory again, you owe me a cigarette, which is like a pretty brilliant little like college moment. Um, but the big thing is that Stephen's proposition is that aesthetics are static, in terms of passions. Aesthetics are static, and that's a good thing. Um, his sort of large proposition that happens near the end here is that art makes you feel in a way that is contained unto itself, whereas the world's passions are kinetic passions. They are like carnal things that drive one towards their desire. They are terror, things that drive you towards or away from the object of the passion. Whereas aesthetic passions are static. They are being held in moments of awe. I'm not using the right words. I have them in a note in my phone, but I'm currently looking at my phone, so I can't exactly like grab it and turn it around and read it and show you my desk or whatever. But they arrest you. That's the word he uses repeatedly. That the aesthetic, the point of the aesthetic, or the goal of the aesthetic, should be to arrest the viewer or the reader in a passion, is to suspend them in a moment of passion, rather than have that passion drive them toward or away from something. And this is what I'm sort of saying when I think he's kind of full of shit, as a theoretician. I think that's a very self-involved way of thinking about art, that you can pull it away from the material conditions, and it's explicitly talked about in this conversation with somebody after he has gotten in a fight with a Marxist. So hi. but I thought that bit was I thought that was a really interesting bit of character work of using aesthetic theory as a way of building, or maybe more accurately, um, solidifying character. And I think that's pretty cool. Um, so here's the last bit. This is after the conversation with Lynch that I was just describing. He has another conversation with his friend Cranley. Um, uh, Here we go. Okay. Not as you are now, not as you had to become, Cranley repeated. Let me ask you a question. Do you love your mother? Stephen shook his head slowly. I don't know what your words mean, he said simply. Have you never loved anyone? Cranley asked. Do you mean women? I am not speaking of that, Cranley said in a colder tone. I ask you if you ever felt love towards anyone or anything. Stephen walked on beside his friend, staring gloomily at the footpath. I tried to love God, he said at length, and it seems now I failed. It is very difficult. I tried to unite my will with the will of God instant by instant. In that I did not always fail. I could perhaps do that still. Cranley cut him short by asking, Has your mother had a happy life? How do I know? Stephen said. How many children had she? 9 or 10, Stephen answered. Some died. Was your father, Cranley interrupted himself for an instant, and then said, I don't want to pry into your family affairs, but was your father what is called well-to-do? I mean, when you were growing up? Yes, Stephen said. What was he? Cranley asked after a pause. Stephen began to enumerate glibly his father's attributes. A medical student, an oarsman, a tender, an amateur actor, a shouting politician, a small landlord, a small investor, a drinker, a good fellow, a storyteller, somebody's secretary, something in a distillery, a tax gatherer, a bankrupt, and at present a praiser of his own past. Cranley laughed, tightening his grip on Stephen's arm, and said, The distillery is damn good. Uh, is there anything else you want to know? Stephen asked. Are you in good circumstances at present? Do I look it? Stephen asked bluntly. So then, Cranley went on musingly, you were born in the lap of luxury. He used the phrase broadly and loudly, as he often used technical expressions, as if he wished his hearer to understand that they were used by him without conviction. Your mother must have gone through a good deal of suffering, he said then. Would you not try to save her from more suffering? Would you not try to save her from suffering more, even if... Or would you? If I could, Stephen said, that would cost me very little. Then do so, Cranley said. Do as she wishes you to do. What is it for you? You disbelieve in it. It is a form, nothing else, and you will set her mind at rest. He ceased, and as Stephen did not reply, remained silent. Then, as if giving utterance to the process of his own thought, he said, Whatever else is unsure in this stinking dunghill of a world, a mother's love is not. Your mother brings you into the world, carries you first in her body. What do we know about what she feels? But whatever she feels, it at least must be real. It must be. What are our ideas or ambitions? Play. Ideas. Why, that bloody beating goat Temple has ideas. McCann has ideas too. Every jackass going the roads thinks he has ideas. Um, yeah. I don't think I have a lot more to say there. I think I said a lot more than I intended to. I like that passage. Um, I like the way that really good conversation about aesthetic theory gets brought back into sort of the realities of working class life, uh, of the lot of women, even as understood through to shithead little college kids who are both men. I think it's I don't know. I'm quite had. I'm quite had. I'm quite had with this book. I'm quite glad that I read A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man finally. It was harder than I'd hoped, but easier than I expected, and Um, and I think it's gonna hold a special place for me for a while. And now, as my aforementioned coworker said, I have my passport to Ulysses. Um, and as I said to him, maybe someday. Um, thanks. Hey, thanks for not watching.